Okay? And how many of you folks are artists in the Web3 space? How many of you in the culture, music? Yeah. Okay, so that's the crew. We'll keep the flow.
Who's an entrepreneur?
There we go.
Can you guys hear me? All right, this is really good luck because this is mic number 4 and that was the number I wore when I played sports, so I'm feeling really good right now.
AAU ball. All right, so everyone, Scooter, do you want to introduce yourself? You're going to do it.
Hi, I'm Scott Scooter Braun. I was born in New York and I'm a diehard Jets fan. Sorry, it's me. That's why I'm here. It's because Gary Vee and I have such a love for the Jets, and our lives have been so extraordinary. And we believe that we would lose every Sunday to humble ourselves. But now we have Aaron Rodgers, and we have hope.
All right, we're going to...
Not a lot of Jets fans here.
Yes, we've got some folks over here on the right. All right, in the spirit of the audience, Scooter and I have kind of set up a few different flows that we wanted to go through. But, there's so much happening in the space with this mix of audience. There's obviously marketers that are trying to reinvent themselves to be very contemporary and consumer focused. We've got entrepreneurs here that are facing a lot of challenges in the market. We've got a lot of folks here from the Web3 space that have had a very, very volatile last 18 to 24 months. And I think we're going to try to spread a lot of wisdom because Scooter's got a lot of it, and I think he's going to give us a lot of insight. So let's get into it. The first thing I wanted to jump into is really this idea of success and failure live next door to each other. And if you can actually expand on that and even include the story of how you were in Chile, having that moment where you had to reinvent kind of your belief system that then really was a cascade to a lot of the early success that became the foundation for everything you're doing now. But if you can help folks understand the mindset, the mind frame, the real challenges, the insecurities, a little bit of the imposter syndrome, kind of touch upon all of that.
That's a big question. Okay, so I guess I got to story tell a little bit. So I was 20 years old in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was throwing parties after I sold fake IDs. And a guy came to my parties, and at the time Atlanta was very segregated. This was probably like 2001. And it was segregated within the club community. So basically these club owners were like, well, I'm gonna play techno music to get the white crowd, and I'm gonna play hip hop to get the black crowd, and I don't want anybody mixing. And I didn't come from Atlanta, and my family is a multicultural family. So, and I loved hip hop, and I loved rock and roll, so I wanted to kind of create a different element. So I had these parties that were the first time in Atlanta where people were coming together, all different races, all different cultures, and really loving music, the universal language together. And there was different guys who would come to my parties. One was an actor named Jason Weaver. He goes, "You want to see how the other half lives?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he starts taking me every Tuesday to a place called the Velvet Room, which was, I was the only white boy showing up at the Velvet Room on Tuesdays. And there was a promoter there named Alex Gidewan, who was an Ethiopian immigrant who started off as a parking lot attendant. Now he's actually doing Lil Baby's tour as the tour promoter. He's the biggest club owner in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was so fascinated with seeing this white boy trying to get in that he would let me in each week with his stutter. He had a stutter. He was like, "White boy, come in." And he became one of my first mentors, and he taught me how to promote parties. He taught me how to create a cut line. He taught me how to do this stuff. And he taught me what my value was. And then when I was doing that, whether it be an up-and-coming rapper named Ludacris who's like helping me with my parties, or an up-and-coming rapper named T.I., and then there was a guy named Jermaine Dupri who was like, "I think you have more potential than parties, why don't you come work with me?" And I was 20 years old. He made me the vice president of a company called So Def. And that was my first experience of understanding that I could be more than what I was doing, and that someone believed in me, and Jermaine gave me that belief in myself. I worked for Jermaine for 3-4 years, and I had all these ideas about social media. There was something called thefacebook.com that was launching. There was this thing called YouTube that was coming out. People were talking about this thing called Twitter because Ashton Kutcher was on the suggested user list. And I had all these ideas about social media, and while I had done all this great stuff at the record label, no one was really listening to me. And I was at a party consulting a client, and Little John was there. Now, not many people in their life will say Little John pulled them aside and give them life-changing advice and changed their career, but John did that for me. People don't know this, but there was something called So-So Def Bass All-Stars. If you're from the South, you knew what that was. Little John was that, and he worked for Jermaine for 12 years creating that sound. And he told me, he goes, I love Jermaine, but don't take 12 years to leave and be your own man. And I left because of that conversation. And I started my own thing, and I believe in this social media thing. And I was so scared because I didn't know what to do. It was like, who am I without this identity? Without being this young kid who's this VP? And my brother was backpacking. My brother's also close with Gary. My brother was backpacking. He had been on the semester at Seaboat. He'd done everything right. He didn't drop out of college like me. He did the school right like mom and dad wanted. And then he went on semester at sea. He was on a boat that got hit by a tsunami rogue wave, and he almost died. Changed his life, and he started something called Pencils of Promise, which is a big nonprofit. He was backpacking South America, living in hostels for $5 a night, 15-hour bus rides here and there, and I was reading his blog journal. And I was like, man, he seems to be living life, and I didn't know what to do. And I always thought backpacking was like rich kids just running away from their life. And I realized that all these kids were down there, they didn't have money either, and they were just kind of having this experience in their youth. So I called him, wrote him an email, and he told me what I needed, and I took a one-way ticket to Chile. And I lived in Uruguay and Chile and Argentina with him, kind of going on these bus rides all over the place for a month. And when you come from what I was in Atlanta for 5 years and go to do that, let's just say I didn't trust anybody when I went backpacking. When I was in Atlanta, you guys hear about all this in these songs, but like, I knew all these guys. These are the guys that like I knew. You hear about BMF on the TV show, I knew them. And so I had a gun on my ankle when I was a young kid, and I was this kid from a nice suburb who was too stupid and too ignorant to know that I was putting myself in these dangerous situations. And I didn't trust anybody because there were no contracts, it was your word. And I go down there and I'm in Chile, and my brother's like, we're gonna live in this hostel, and you just put your backpack over there. With everything that you have to your name in that backpack, it's just gonna go right there, and other people are in the room with us, you've never met them before. And I was like, fuck this. And I learned that month, there's some deeper stories that happened, but I learned that month that it's better to trust humanity and go through life and maybe get hurt than go through just assuming everyone's out to get you. And when I came back, I said, I'm gonna start my own thing. I'm known as this party promoter, I'm known as this VP. I'm gonna go cold turkey, I'm gonna build my company, which is what I have today. And I had enough money for 13 months, long-winded answer to get to your question. I had enough money for 13 months, and I found 2 artists because Shaka Zulu, who's Ludacris's manager, said, you only need 1. And I was like, well, I'm gonna bring 2. And I said, I had this idea, I'm gonna find a kid, because I was a big Michael Jackson fan. I was like, I'm gonna find a kid who sings with an angelic voice, who makes you wanna believe in love again, because we're all jaded as we get older. And then I'm gonna find something hip hop that speaks to all these college kids that I'm throwing parties for. First artist I found on MySpace was Asher Roth, and we had the song I Love College. So it definitely spoke to those college kids. And the second one, I was on YouTube consulting someone else, and I saw this 12-year-old singing by mistake, and it was Justin Bieber. And those were the first 2 acts I signed to my label and started managing them. And we went on a run, and at month 11, I had Justin and his mom living, maybe illegally, in a townhouse that I was paying for. Aaron rents furniture, paying for schooling, and I had Asher living in something we called the Greenhouse, which was a just dump of a place that I got for him and his friends. They all dropped out of college to come work with me. And everyone in Atlanta thought I was killing it because of my history, but the truth was I had 2 more months of money and I was dead broke. And they were all depending on me. And my dad called to check on me, and this is, I dropped out of college, I haven't asked him for anything forever, and asking him for help was like dying to me. And he asked me how I was doing, and I was 25 years old, and I just started hysterically crying. And I didn't expect that to happen. I told him I'm a failure, no one knows, I'm fake, it's all gonna fall apart. And he said, listen, you haven't listened to a goddamn word I've ever said. So you said you have 2 more months, see it through. And the next day, Asher Roth came in and said, I have this idea, and he played me I Love College. And within 2 months, I was able to get him $1 million publishing deal, and $100,000 saved my company, and we never looked back. And now, with the sale of our company and us combining in a company, and now I'm the CEO of Hive, we're a 10 billion market cap company. Woo! So that is why I say success and failure live up next door to each other. So I saw a lot of people say entrepreneurs, a lot of people have ideas. I'm sure a lot of people that would come in here confident, you're trying to meet people, you're networking, but then you go home at night, you cry yourself to sleep because you have no idea how you're actually gonna make this thing happen. I've been there, that doesn't ever go away. Those days still happen where I'm going to sleep and like, how do I maintain this? And you go through it, and just know that when you get to that edge, when you feel like you're gonna fail, the success is just over that edge. Like, just keep going.
So is that the fuel? It's like optimism, but just real belief in your output, the work you're doing. Because 13 months becoming 12, becoming 11, probably feels still like you're going up the ride, right? It's like part of the process. At what point did you start to get a little bit concerned? And how did you cope through that process? Did you second guess yourself? Did you stay true to your instinct?
I mean, I was always concerned. If you're an entrepreneur, you'll understand this. You're just walking around as you're building, scared all the time, pretending like you're confident. Like, it's the truth. Like, we're not vulnerable enough. We don't talk about it. It took me a long time to get to this place to just understand. Because then when I finally learned about vulnerability, I think there was a point where I would talk about it, and it was a tool for me to make myself feel even better. Where I would pretend to be vulnerable. I would tell you the things that would make you think I'm vulnerable, because then you feel connected to me. Then I understood what real vulnerability is. When you're really uncomfortable, when you're willing to share and actually let people in. Because the other side of being an entrepreneur who's successful is if you're not truly vulnerable, how the hell, I used to walk around and think, deep down I was like, well, no one's actually there for me, they don't understand me. You hear Jeff Bezos say how entrepreneurs are the most misunderstood people in the world. We're misunderstood because how do we expect someone to understand us if we don't let them in? And now I'm just at a point in my life where I don't want to live like that anymore. I want people to know that, like, even with the so-called success that I've had, I'm still having this human experience, trying to figure it out, going through the same thing everyone else is going through. And there are days that are great, and then I have to give myself the grace of those days that suck. And you're scared, and I got 3 kids, and I'm like, well, how do I make it right for them? And how do I do this? And how do I manage that? And then how do I be there for my friends? And this person, you constantly going through it. And the one thing that I've learned, we were talking about it backstage, is about 3 years ago, I've talked about this in almost every podcast. I think it almost sounds like I'm in a cult. I did this thing called the Hoffman process. Because a friend of mine, I opened up and I was vulnerable and he got me to go. And it was a week, no phone, no email, working on early childhood and understanding why you are the way you are. And the idea of me turning my phone and email off for a week was the scariest thing I'd ever heard of, because I hadn't done that in 20 years. And I said this on a podcast recently, when I actually stepped into that abyss and did it, I got more out of a week for myself than I did in 20 years. And I learned about myself, I understood myself. The biggest beneficiaries other than myself have been my children and my friends. And now I decided every year I'm going to commit to that. So the year after, I went and did something else. The year after that, I went to Sedona and studied breathwork for a week and meditation. And this year, when I told my mom what I'm doing this year, she couldn't believe it because I can talk. I'm doing a 10-day silent retreat.
Yeah.
It's probably gonna be the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But I'm like interested. I think if you take a week once a year to do self-work, you will be a better person, a better entrepreneur, and you'll just be. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but what I want to basically say is the one thing that upsets me is how many people tell me they're like not ready to do this right now because they're like, well, I don't want to change. I'm on my grind. I'm in killer mode. If I do this, I might lose my edge. Please don't think that way. Because 1, you won't lose your edge, but 2, what you might find out is what you actually really want, and you can avoid all the pain later on. And taking time for you is probably the best advice I can give anyone, because it took me 39 years to figure it out, and I don't wish that on anybody. And coming here and hustling is great, and that no sleep mentality, but like, Jeff Bezos gets 8 hours of sleep. He built a pretty good business. And there's some kid right now who's not even born, who's not out hustling every single day, and he's going to build something that's gonna be bigger than everyone else in this room, including myself. You know, so just take the time for you, it's important.
That's amazing. Yeah, you could go with that.
Still hustle, still hustle. Gary's gonna be like, what are you doing?
You know, Gary this morning made a comment about family and community and the importance of all of us being here and leaning on each other. In the last
I'm talking way too long, we're running out of time.
Oh, we're gonna get to the good stuff. We'll go a little over if we need to. But in the last 30 minutes, I've seen so many people come to you, Scooter, and the time that you took to share some advice and be very thoughtful was really, really special. And not that I didn't think you were a good guy, but it was really, really
There's a
special.
certain fan base that doesn't think I'm a good guy.
We're not talking about that today. But I do want to talk about the role of mentorship. And you have kind of blessed the audiences with a lot of seeds of wisdom and a lot of the podcasts that you've done, and I've been following you for some time. Can you talk a little bit about the role of mentorship, when you really realized mentorship mattered, and what made a good mentor versus a fake mentor? Just as a lot of these folks here are going through different stages of growth, any advice can feel like good advice, and that may not necessarily be the case. So if we could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Okay. I talked about the self-work stuff before, so the first thing I'm gonna say to you is one of the greatest mentors you'll have is your own intuition. That's why it's important to take time for silence, because trusting yourself, one, is gonna be one of the greatest mentors you have, and two, it's just a better way to live life. You can follow the data, and if you get it wrong when your intuition is telling you that that's where you should go, and you follow the data, you will regret it the rest of your life. But if you get it wrong, and you trusted your gut, you can live with that. So think about it that way, trust yourself. That's the first thing. The second thing is, just talk to people about what they've been through, and they will give you gems along the way. Not one person needs to be your only mentor. Sometimes an Uber driver can be your mentor. You can start talking about your life and they'll give you some wisdom. Like I was telling them backstage that two of my heroes, you know, me and Gary bonded because we come from immigrant families. My father was a refugee in this country. My grandmother, before she passed, I took her to Disneyland and she told me I would have dreamed to clean this place. So when I'm in a building like this, my grandmother would have dreamed to clean a place like this. So don't think that you gotta find someone powerful and successful to be your mentor. She gave me better advice than anyone I ever met. So then I'll give you one tip from someone that, you know, people get excited when I talk to this person, but it really is a gem. Not everyone is gonna get to talk to Jeff Bezos. I have become close to Jeff Bezos and I get to ask him questions. He's a mentor to me. I got to ask Jeff one time, what do you want? $200 billion? Like, what do you want? You could literally have anything commercially you want. And he looked at me and he said, I want to evolve. He said, I want to be a better father. I want to be a better friend. I want to be better at intimacy. And I realized you don't need $200 billion to start that. So that's the kind of mentorship that I like, that it teaches that. And then I also like reading. Like, the books can be great mentors. You know, reading stories about other entrepreneurs, reading stories about other people's journeys, you can actually take from that. You don't have to meet these people. Some of these people are dead, but there are books that give you the knowledge so you don't have to repeat the mistakes and you can grow. And I'd also say to you, always study the end game. You know, look for what they wanted to do once they had it, and that will give you a cheat code so you don't have to waste your time in the nonsense.
Time is flying, but we need to talk about the Hive deal. Hive, one of the biggest deals I think we've seen in the space. Can we talk a little bit about the art of the deal, how it happened? It's such a cultural mashup, East versus West. Language becomes a barrier, but trust becomes the love language.
I love this story.
Yeah, please.
I did a deal. I sold my entertainment company to this company, Hive. I'm now the CEO of Hive America. I'm on the board. That's the company with 10 billion market cap. I sold my company for over $1 billion because of a tarot card reader. I was selling my company. I was going through COVID. I was going through a very, very tough time in my personal life. I was really focused on my kids, and I was like, okay, maybe it's time, let me look for the right partner. And a buddy of mine, Kevin Mayer, who come from Disney, teamed up with Blackstone, and they were doing this deal, and they wanted me to be their first deal and partner with Kevin. And I really like Kevin. To this day, I think he's an amazing executive. Disney Plus is because of that man. We had a deal we had worked on for months, and I let my friend Angie read cards, and that's what she does. and she told me, we were talking about personal life, and out of nowhere she goes, hey, by the way, with your business life, you're working on something, a big deal, but I know you're not gonna hear this, but there's something else that will show up in 2 weeks. I'm not saying you're gonna do it, but give yourself 2 more weeks. I was supposed to sign in 3 days. I called my guy and I said, I need you to give us 2 weeks. He's like, how the hell am I supposed to do that? I don't know. Next day he got COVID. He stalled for 2 weeks. 2 weeks to the day, I get a call from JP Morgan saying, would you talk to Chairman Bang from Hive, the guy who created BTS? He really wants to talk to you about putting the companies together. And I went, yes, I will. And the offer from Blackstone was around $940 million. We sold for $1.2 billion.
There's another lesson I think for all of it, which is when you started to build a relationship with Chairman Bang, you're having a conversation.
We just stay up here until the music plays?
Yes. Well, this is the last one.
The last one?
It's really
Well,
valuable.
but I'm gonna have to do something that only Gary knows I'm gonna do. Has anyone ever seen my podcast with Gary? No? Okay. Well, do the question and then I'm gonna do it. Go ahead.
The idea, he made a point that you never spoke about the deal and you only spoke about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a very big lesson here because everyone in this audience is likely always focused on the next milestone and focusing on that versus the qualitative and the path to greatness. So if you can just spend 30 seconds on that, and then ask the question. Yeah.
Chairman Bang, the guy who created Hive and BTS, he's actually one of the most incredible people I've ever met. This guy wrote a white paper in 2011 of what Hive would be 10 years later, and it's to the T what it is. And there's a lot I could say about him, but I know we're out of time. We started doing Zooms after I got that call from JP Morgan, very private Zooms no one knew about. And every 2 days we would do a Zoom, just he and I we talked about music, we talked about culture, we talked about family, we talked about meditation, we talked about philosophy. We never talked about the deal. I didn't want to talk about the deal. I wanted to know that if I was going to work with this person, would I like him? Would we bond? Would I be dealing with someone who wanted to talk about finance, or would I be enjoying my next chapter because that's what I wanted to do? And he looked at me one day, I think it was the 4th meeting, and he said, you know, in the West, I find that they always talk about transaction. Always, what's the deal? What's the deal? How's the deal? In the East, we talk about what we're going to do after the deal is done. He goes, you never once talked to me about the deal. You only talked to me about what we're going to do when it was done. So I want to let you know I've decided I'm doing this deal no matter what. I don't care what the diligence says. And the diligence was good. My company didn't have any false numbers. But when we had the closing call, his lawyer literally said on the phone, Chairman Bang, you cannot close this deal. We have not finished diligence. This is a major transaction. I am recommending against it. And he said, I don't care what we find on the other side. We will solve it together because of that phone call. And we've had a lot of success together, and it's great, and that's the end of my story, and he's gonna hate me, but I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. At the end of my podcast with Gary years ago, Gary looked at me and said, okay, Scooter, I love you, brother. I'm gonna go home now. We're gonna go home. And I said, Gary, let's take one more phone call, because it's always that last phone call that something special happens. And we did, and something really wild happened. So, in honor of me and Gary's podcast, I'm gonna ask you to pick anyone in the crowd for one question, and let's just see what happens.
Quick scan. Gentleman right here with the white vest.
I'm Nicky Gathright. I own Unruly Agency, and big problem I have is how do you decide whether you just go for 1 or 2 artists or the masses?
Okay, did everyone hear what he said? No. He said he owns an agency. How do you know if you go for 1 or 2 artists or the masses? So when you say you're an agency, what does that mean?
We manage talent, anywhere from athletes to models, influencers, all of that.
Okay, and you're trying to figure out if you should go after one person, really back them, or...
Like the majority.
Look, I think it really depends. Do you have someone in that mass group that you think is beyond special you can build a massive business around?
I'd say they're like a couple.
A couple? Have you seen the movie Air? You should watch this movie. Because if you find someone very, very special, focus on that person. Build it as big as you can, and then the masses will come. I have a pretty big company now, and I focused on someone I found to be incredibly extraordinary. And we built a very big business from there. So that's my advice to you. And then in honor, I'm ending, I promise. In honor of what I did with Gary, come backstage with me, let me get your number. You and I will have a private meeting. We'll talk about the business, and I'll try and help.